I knew the room had turned when Mark said my name like it was a curse. "Cynthia, you still running that duct tape spreadsheet circus?" He laughed, full volume, like we were all in a dive bar and not prepping for the Q4 investor sync with Garrison Holdings. The room chuckled. Well, the part of the room that needed his approval did. I kept my eyes on the profit curve I'd modeled 6 quarters ago, the same one that had salvaged our logistics arm from implosion after the West Coast rollout debacle. That line didn't care who laughed. It just kept trending up. He waved his overpriced latte like a damn baton. We're streamlining now. Real-time dashboards, machine learning overlays. Cynthia's still using VLOOKUP like it's 1997. I heard the HR liaison giggle. That was new. She used to ask me to proof her investor briefs. If you're here already, take 2 seconds to hit like and subscribe. It seriously motivates our team to keep sharing these stories. And with 97% of listeners not subscribed, you'd be helping more than you know. Thanks for that. Anyway, back to Mark. He had a way of talking like he'd already won. That Silicon Valley smirk dressed up in finance bro confidence. Thing is, you only act like that when you've never actually lost anything. I watched him plug in his own slides. Animated transitions, a dozen colors, zero substance. His pipeline numbers were bloated guesses based on a model he barely understood. He called it aggressive forecasting. I called it a lawsuit waiting for a signature. I'm just saying, he turned to the founder's assistant. When we hit Series D, we need to cut dead weight, people who can't scale. Dead weight, right in front of me. He didn't even blink when he said it, just scrolled to a slide that literally had the word synergies in Comic Sans. I'm not kidding. I didn't speak, not during that meeting. Not when he pitched his half-baked platform revamp to the data science team like it was the second coming of Amazon Web Services. Not when he told 2 of my junior analysts they were overthinking ROI and replaced their dashboards with a plugin that crashed every 3 days. But I started taking notes, not the kind you write in a Google Doc, the kind you timestamp, screenshot, archive in off-network folders, the kind you print to PDF with metadata intact. I'd been around too long not to know how this movie ends when the wrong person takes credit and the right person stays silent. Because here's the truth. The systems Mark was mocking. They weren't just legacy. They were proprietary frameworks I had quietly baked into our client SLAs during the 2020 rewrite. Smart routing logic, modular billing triggers, compliance alerts that had saved our asses more than once. They weren't loud, but they worked. And every client that mattered had my initials buried somewhere in their deployment trail. Mark didn't know that. He was too busy telling everyone we needed to move fast and break things. Funny how the people who say that never clean up the pieces. After that meeting, I walked back to my desk, clicked open my audit logs, and created a new folder, Continuity Evidence. I had a feeling I'd be needing it soon. By the end of week 2, Mark had figured out how to revoke my edit access on the main dashboards. Not officially. He didn't have the stones to make it a real directive. But I logged in Monday morning and found myself rerouted to the viewer-only tier like some intern shadowing the real work. He didn't say a word about it. Just strolled past my desk mid-morning, smirking, sipping that same smug latte, and muttered, "We're cleaning house. No hard feelings." Sure. No hard feelings, just decades of institutional knowledge boxed up like surplus office chairs. That afternoon, I heard him pitching HR on why I was struggling to adapt. His exact words, "Cynthia's stuck in the old ways. She's brilliant. Don't get me wrong. Just not agile. We're modernizing." Modernizing. That's what he called replacing a battle-tested compliance framework with a Canva flowchart and a Monday.com board that didn't even calculate rolling averages correctly. I didn't fight it. I didn't storm into anyone's office demanding answers. I'd learned a long time ago that outrage makes noise, and noise gets discredited. Quiet, though? Quiet gets archived. So I got to work. Pulled the version histories from the core dashboards, the ones I'd built with conditional logic and integrated alerts tied to real contract milestones. I exported screenshots, recorded all the logic breaks he introduced when he cleaned up my formulas, and started annotating the discrepancies between his pitch deck and the actual deployment capabilities. Then I zipped everything up and uploaded it to an offsite vault I'd been using for years, just in case. The next day, I opened the investor mandate, not the marketing summary, the actual legal filing. 52 pages buried in our compliance wiki that no one under 40 had probably read. Page 6 still listed me by name as the designated systems continuity officer for 3 of our highest grossing clients, Deloro Energy, Axistel, and Bainmark. My initials sat right beside the clause that explicitly stated no new integration or service expansion could be approved without my technical sign-off. Not just a courtesy review, a legal requirement tied to platform liability. Mark hadn't read that far. I knew at the moment he bragged in the Thursday sync that he was streamlining cross-client rollouts and reducing legacy bloat. Translation: cutting corners to juice quarterly optics. What he didn't realize was that without my sign-off, none of those changes were binding. Not with Garrison, not with legal, not even internally. But I didn't tell him. I let him present half-baked mock-ups to the revenue team like he'd cracked some kind of scalability code. I let him forward doctored dashboards to the founders without disclaimers. I even let him override the billing triggers on the Axistel renewal, just long enough for it to throw a silent error that flagged our compliance bot. Because the thing about building a system from scratch is you know exactly where the tripwires are. And Mark? He was sprinting through a minefield in borrowed shoes. Every time he spoke over me, I wrote it down. Every call he blocked me from, I noted who attended and what access they were later granted. Every time he logged into the platform with admin rights he wasn't approved for, I archived the audit trail. Not to tattle, not to sabotage, to survive. Because if I'd learned anything after 15 years in this business, it's that the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman who holds the keys isn't take them away. It's forget she ever had them. It was supposed to be a formality. Just a prep call with Garrison Holdings ahead of the full Q4 review. I'd sat through at least a dozen of these over the years, sometimes speaking, often not, always listening. This one had the same bones: slide decks, financial pacing, a few tech integration updates, and the inevitable round of next steps, fluff. Mark insisted on running the whole thing himself. It's better optics if one voice leads, he told me with that patronizing pat on the shoulder that made me want to scrub my skin raw. I joined from a side room, logged in under the standard compliance role. No video, no speaking privileges, just enough access to monitor what got said and what got conveniently rewritten later. HR was on the call too, taking notes, nodding on cue, whispering in Slack like a high schooler passing notes in homeroom. Most of the Garrison team had cameras off, but I recognized the soft, static hum of their lead investor's mic. Preston V. Garrison III. When he spoke, whole companies shut up and leaned in. Mark started with his usual fireworks. Overconfident, bloated buzzwords, spinning 6-week-old projections into some agile growth velocity nonsense. He showed them a color-coded map of client accounts. Most of the colors were wrong. He said the West Coast expansions were 99% stabilized, which I knew for a fact meant at least 2 major clients were still throttling API usage to avoid breaking their SLA limits. I watched him breeze past that slide in under 5 seconds. Then came the moment. The team was transitioning into a breakout to finalize investor-side questions. A modicum of silence. One of those awkward, "Are we muted?" lulls. Mark leaned sideways in his chair, close to where HR's mic was still hot. "It's not our fault," he muttered, too casual, too smug. "She's just too slow and stubborn. Good at legacy stuff, but it's dead weight now." My jaw locked. It took a second to register. I heard the flick of HR's pen. A low exhale. Someone shifted on camera. Then Preston's voice cut through the line like a scalpel. "If she's too slow," he said, calm as a Sunday sermon, "why do all her projects make money and yours don't?" Silence. Not the polite kind, the lethal kind. The kind that wraps around your throat and dares you to exhale. Mark fumbled with his mouse. I heard a nervous chuckle. HR cleared her throat like that would somehow swallow the moment. I think we were transitioning," Mark started. Preston didn't reply. That was it. Just one sentence. But I knew a corporate bullet when I heard one. I sat back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, heart thudding a slow, deliberate rhythm. That wasn't just a reprimand. That was a signal. Someone had been paying attention. Not to the flash, not to the metrics he fumbled into a keynote. To the source, to the pattern, to the fact that every rollout tied to my name hit targets, stayed in compliance, reduced churn, outperformed. He hadn't said my name. He didn't have to. That one line had cut through months of being sidelined, of being called slow because I didn't throw tantrums in Slack or slap a new brand font on the dashboard every Friday. I kept my mic off, said nothing, but I smiled. A small one. The kind that meant I was done absorbing and just starting to prepare. It came after hours. Most people had already logged off, the office Slack channels gone quiet, except for the occasional emoji reaction in HR's funny memes only thread. I was still at my desk, not because I had to be, but because I knew instinctively that the echo of that investor call wasn't done bouncing through the walls yet. Around 6:42 p.m., the message popped up, an internal ping I hadn't seen in over a year. Garrison's technical liaison, Janelle Ngo. She was sharp, deliberate, and not prone to small talk. We'd exchanged exactly 6 emails during the 2020 integration build-out, all time-stamped, all archived. She'd once corrected one of our VP's API assumptions in a 5-word reply that tanked his entire rollout plan. I remembered liking her. Her message tonight was just one line. Could you send over your original systems blueprint from the 2020 integration? No preamble, no smiley face, just the ask. I didn't ask why. I pulled the blueprint. The real one, the high-fidelity architecture map with layer logic, dependencies, failover protocol, and the deployment key references that we'd spent 9 months building before Mark ever knew we existed. I attached the accompanying logs from the original rollout, complete with post-deploy audits, usage benchmarks, and the triggered compliance flags we'd solved before they even reached the clients. Then I found the internal memo, dated January 14th, 2021, where Mark, fresh off his first promotion, had signed off on phase 2 of that same system. My edits were still visible in the metadata, tracked changes he never removed, my initials in the margins, my timestamps embedded in the revision history. I zipped it into a clean folder. No notes, no color commentary, just the data. And I hit send. That was it. I didn't receive a thank you, no follow-up, no confirmation. But the moment I sent it, something shifted. Not in the air. This wasn't dramatic like in the movies, but there was a weight to it. A current I could feel moving through the invisible pipes of this company, upstream, toward the people who didn't care about tone or seniority, or who sat closer to the conference room windows. People who watched profit trends like blood pressure, who didn't waste time on branding decks or alignment sessions, who measured loyalty and performance curves and tolerances met under pressure, the kind of people who already suspected something was broken, and now had the blueprint to see who built what. I didn't log off. I stayed, opened a fresh notepad, and began mapping a silent audit trail of my own. Not because I planned to use it, but because it felt like the game had shifted from defense to record keeping. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be replaced. I felt like I was being watched, for the right reasons. No applause, no spotlight, just that quiet acknowledgement from above. She built this, and someone finally had remembered. Mark came in that morning like he'd just invented daylight. Hair slicked back, designer mug in hand, a sweatshirt that probably cost more than my first car. His whole vibe screamed co-founder energy, even though he'd been here less than 3 fiscal quarters and couldn't tell a net revenue pull from a churn-adjusted anomaly if you handed him flashcards. He walked into the strategy sync 10 minutes late, dropped into his chair like he was settling onto a throne, and opened with a phrase I've come to recognize as a red flag for corporate narcissists everywhere. Let's realign velocity expectations. I didn't flinch, just adjusted the monitor slightly and toggled the quarterly report open again. My report, the one he'd scrubbed my name from in the footer and pretended was a cross-team collaboration. A lie, like most of the numbers he'd been parroting lately. He glanced over at me with that smug little smirk that made interns second-guess their value. "Cynthia," he said, dragging out the syllables like I was a receptionist who'd just overstepped. "I think we both know that you're not built for this speed. It's not a bad thing, just different generations, different gears." There was a beat. The room didn't laugh, not this time. I didn't bother responding. Just tilted my eyes down to my calendar. One new invite had appeared. Clean, precise. 10:30 a.m., one-on-one. Lead investor. Cynthia. No other attendees, no assistants, no HR shadow, no Mark. I stared at it for a second longer than necessary, then looked up slowly. Not at him, past him. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. He kept talking, something about gamifying internal dashboards and tightening the brand funnel, the usual meaningless sludge, but his pacing was off, his voice too eager. I could feel it, the slight catch in his rhythm, like some part of him could sense the air was different. Across the table, one of the senior data engineers who hadn't looked me in the eye for weeks flicked a glance at the invite on my screen, then at me, then quickly back down. Subtle, but I saw it. The sync ended early. Mark said he had a founder-tier meeting with a branding agency. Nobody asked for details. I didn't move. Just waited until the room cleared, then opened the invite. No agenda attached, just the location, executive conference line, same code used by Garrison's oversight board. For the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe fully. Not because I'd won anything. Not yet. But because I'd just seen the first piece of real evidence that someone upstairs had stopped listening to the noise and started following the signal. And that signal didn't spell M-A-R-K. It spelled continuity, profit, systems that didn't crash under pressure. It spelled me. I closed my laptop gently. He'd spent a month talking over me. And now, finally, the people who mattered had decided they didn't need to hear him at all. Mark opened the board call with that same overly rehearsed swagger he'd been wearing since the day he was handed the title. You could hear it in his voice. Too polished, too eager, like he was trying to sell a product he didn't fully understand, which, to be fair, he was. We've optimized the pipeline to reduce lag across verticals, he announced, clicking through slides packed with jargon and gradients. The new dashboards reflect a more agile revenue model, and we're seeing exponential early-stage indicators. No one responded. He kept talking, speeding up, tripping slightly over the word decentralized, throwing in an unnecessary acronym or two like confetti at a sales kickoff. You could feel the silence on the call growing heavier with each click. Then it came. Preston's voice smooth as glass. Where's the woman whose charts made us $14 million last quarter? Not loud, not accusatory, just surgical. Mark froze. You could almost hear his lips parting, trying to form a name he hadn't said in weeks. Silence. No one jumped in. Not HR, not the junior PM Mark had brought in to own the narrative. Even the CEO stayed still, eyes darting between screens. So I stood up. No commentary, no apology. Just walked to the center table, opened my laptop, and plugged in. My screen lit up on the main projector. The original framework I'd built, still operational, still accurate, still the only system we had that mapped predictive client churn against SLA violations. I flipped to the updated forecast, which I'd maintained quietly in a shadow file ever since Mark stripped access. This is the actual pipeline, I said, calm. Client engagement heat maps are embedded, and renewal probabilities are tiered based on trailing benchmarks, not aspirational targets. I didn't look at Mark, didn't need to. I watched Preston lean slightly forward, scanning the numbers. He gave the smallest nod, then looked toward the rest of the board. Good, he said. Let's work from this. And just like that, the meeting pivoted. They asked for integration timelines. I gave them versioned logs. They wanted contract risk on West Coast rollouts. I pulled the compliance deltas. Someone asked about the new routing tool, Mark's initiative, and I gently, factually explained it didn't meet the criteria for multi-client deployment due to unresolved data leakage concerns. No blame, no drama, just precision. I answered what they asked, clarified what mattered, and made it clear, without saying it, that the numbers they trusted had always come from one place. They weren't guessing anymore. They'd verified. When the call ended, Mark didn't say a word. He stared down at his closed laptop, fingers clenched slightly around his pen. I half expected him to lunge back in, spin the room with one more buzzword grenade, but he didn't. Because there was nothing left to spin. One voice had been removed, another had taken its place, not loudly, not theatrically, but permanently. Thursday night passed like any other, quiet, unremarkable. No Slack messages, no urgent calendar changes. But when I came in Friday morning, something was different. Mark's desk, usually a cluttered shrine to self-importance with 3 monitors and a ring light, was clean, wiped down, cables coiled. One sad, half-dead pothos sat off to the side like it hadn't been watered in weeks. A cardboard box rested neatly beside the chair. His mug was gone. So was the monogrammed jacket he always draped over the back like it was some executive flag. I didn't ask. No one did. By 9 a.m., IT had reassigned his admin credentials. The project folders he claimed as his own builds had reverted to original permissions. Mine. The junior analyst he'd ordered around all month quietly reopened our old Slack channel. At 10:15, his name disappeared from the org chart. Not marked transitioning, not labeled moving on, just gone. No announcement. Because that's how internal cleanup works. Not with a bang, with a quiet cursor blink. HR never calls it what it is. They say words like alignment, restructuring, leadership shift. But when someone goes that fast, with no handover and no goodbye post on LinkedIn, it's not a pivot. It's a purge. I didn't celebrate, didn't fist pump or forward snide memes. That's not how you handle cleanup when it's your floor they were trying to burn down. Around noon, I headed down to grab coffee. Elevator pinged open and out walked the founder, fresh from Singapore in a slate gray blazer, phone already glued to his ear. He paused when he saw me, took half a beat, then pulled the phone away, looked me up and down, and said with a kind of amused clarity, "Didn't realize you were that Cynthia." I smiled. Nothing more. He nodded, stepped past, and kept walking. That was it. No parade, no promotion party. But I felt it in my bones, an old balance returning. The kind of internal gravity that snaps back into place when you remove the distortion. Not because someone new showed up, but because the wrong person finally left. I walked back upstairs, past Mark's empty desk, sat down, opened the same spreadsheet he used to mock. Profit margins still holding, systems still running, continuity restored. The email came midweek, tucked between an API bug alert and a catering invoice for the holiday party no one asked for. No subject line in all caps. No, please join me in congratulating, just a revised PDF of the org chart from operations with a note. Effective immediately. Director, Systems Continuity, C. Morales. That was it. No balloons, no awkward HR speech, just a new box in the flowchart, darker gray, closer to the top, and a direct reporting line drawn to the board liaison instead of middle management. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because of what it didn't say. No conditions, no interim, no caveats about collaboration layers or cross-functional dependency gates. Just a title, and the quiet authority that came with it. The next day, I received access to a new folder buried inside the company drive, one I hadn't seen since the merger. It held archival contracts, client escalation protocols, and the full permissions tree for our enterprise platform. The same platform Mark had tried to reinvent with a branding agency and a buzzword salad. The one he said needed an overhaul for scale. It was still there. My original logic. The same schema I built under the radar back in 2019 when the founder asked for something stable but quiet. All I had to do was tidy it, patch a few dependencies, and remove the garbage code Mark and his hirelings had layered on like glitter over rust. By Thursday, the version was live. No launch deck, no email blast. Just better, faster, silent where it needed to be. I left a small, non-public note in the changelog. Legacy logic restored. Fault tolerance at 99.6%. The junior engineers started pinging me again, not with panic, but curiosity. "Hey, I saw that recursive loop you used in the new billing module. Can we get a breakdown?" One of them even asked if I'd run a lunch and learn on how to document systems for long-term scaling. I said yes. Not because I needed the spotlight, but because the next generation shouldn't have to build while ducking elbows from above. People stopped calling me ops adjacent or support adapted. They just called me by name. I still sat at the same desk, same view of the downtown skyline, same broken heater that rattled when it kicked in under my chair. But my keycard opened more doors now, both literally and metaphorically. The chatter shifted, quiet but noticeable. Less grandstanding in meetings. Fewer vanity metrics, more people using the word sustainable without rolling their eyes. One of the board members even sent a note, just a single line. "Your systems kept us steady. Thank you." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. That's the thing about authority when it's real. It doesn't announce itself with a headline. It arrives in the absence of noise and stays there. 6 weeks later, I found myself in a private dining room overlooking the city skyline, seated between two people who used to forget my name. It was the annual investor dinner, Garrison's way of keeping the money happy and the talent seen. Linen tablecloths, votive candles, the kind of catered meal that came with a menu card, and 3 separate forks. I wore the same blazer I always wore. Nothing flashy, just solid, just mine. The evening was nearly over when the COO of Garrison, Preston's second-in-command, stood up and tapped his glass. The sound cut through the quiet hum of small talk and dessert spoons. He smiled, lifted his flute of champagne, then nodded in my direction. This woman didn't raise her voice once, he said, calm and certain, but she built everything we just toasted. Heads turned. A few faces I recognized from Zoom windows and silent CC threads gave small nods. 1 or 2 clapped, soft and unsure, like they weren't sure if it was a speech or just a footnote. I didn't move, just nodded back, quiet, steady, same way I always had. A junior partner, young, nervous, still trying to pretend he understood how any of this worked, leaned toward me with a sheepish grin. So, what do you actually do? I looked down at the black folder in my lap. Inside, a copy of our most recent quarterly stability report. Charts steady. Incidents down, renewals up. On the last page, stapled to the back, a visual, my original rollout diagram from 2020. The one I built at 2 a.m. in a hotel room during that first merger, because the entire West Region deployment had fallen apart and no one else could fix it. I closed the folder gently. Make sure the lights stay on, I said. He blinked, confused, then nodded like he understood. But he didn't. Not really. And that was okay. Later that night, as I passed through the executive floor, empty, silent, every desk cleared, I paused outside the new boardroom. Something caught my eye. Framed behind glass, just inside the door, was a diagram. Mine, same grid, same flow, same faint pencil mark where I'd corrected a calculation mid-print, preserved exactly as it had been. No caption, no plaque. But there, permanent. I stood for a moment, just long enough to feel it. Not pride, not vindication. Something quieter. Recognition. Earned not through flash or noise, not through titles shouted in open plan meetings, not through war cries of disruption or velocity, but through steady work, through systems that held, through a name that didn't need to be said out loud for people to know who made it possible. Then I walked away, lights still on,